So, help me out, friends. As a tree grows, we all know that there are tree rings formed, right? We got that part figured out. Where are they? They come from the inside? Or do they go on the outside? What do you say? Outside. What evidence do you have for that? What evidence do you have for that? It is on the outside. That is correct. We did talk a little bit about that yesterday, but what I want right now is for you to figure out why that is. Do you need a minute to talk to your table mates about the why part of that question? Yeah? Go ahead. Have a little quick conversation. Go, go, go. I do. Hold on just a second. So what are we saying, friends? You said outside. What evidence do you have for that? Or what reasoning? Why did you say it?
Because you talked about it yesterday.
That's the wrong answer. I mean, it's true. We did talk about it yesterday. But the reason that I bring this up today is not because, I think this is one of those facts that you need to know forever. It's because I want to make sure that you actually understand why and how that might be true. So take a look at this picture. You saw this picture yesterday, right? So this should look familiar to you. Looking at this picture, why might we... So a lot of people want the rings to come from the middle and push out and push out and push out and push out. We had a long conversation in the other class, they were debating back and forth for a long time. But there are some reasons or some ways that you can look at this that might give you evidence that, in fact, it could only be building out and out and out. Take a look up here. What did you guys just talk about? There are lots of good reasons. There are lots of good answers. Give it a shot, Elena. Go for it.
I don't think this is right at
That's
all.
okay, but give it a shot.
When the tree's like a sapling, it's really small, and then as it grows, it's bigger, so then the rings are bigger.
That's awesome. That's exactly right. You don't need to sell yourself short. That's exactly right. When the tree is first grows, right? It's very, very small. Did they still do that? They give you trees when you're in elementary school for Arbor Day. Do you remember that? Yeah. And when you get those trees, most of which don't live. If your trees are anything like my trees, we would always plant one every year, and then it would die, or my dad would run over it with a lawnmower. I don't know about yours, but yeah. Your tree is still in the backyard?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Anyway, so if you did that, the trunk of that little sapling, that little tree, is how big? It's really, really little, right? And then as it grows, what happens to the tree?
It gets bigger.
It gets bigger up, and it also gets bigger out. It gets wider and wider and wider. So that means that it's got to keep building rings around in order to get bigger and bigger and bigger. You guys need to separate yourselves for the next 10 minutes. Can you find different seats so that you're not sitting at the same table, please? I'd appreciate it. Thanks. Both of you need to move. That would be awesome. Yep, that'd be great. Thanks. Another piece of evidence that you might look at, if you're looking at a, cut of a tree, what's this here? Do we know? Some sort of something that happened, right? And the tree, it looks like it was some sort of injury, essentially, like some sort of crack or cut that had to be filled in on. But if it was building out, then this thing wouldn't live in the middle there, right? Yeah. So it keeps building out, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. Absolutely. So I just want you to keep that in your brain. Right now, we're going to move on, and I want you to get out your Tree Rings lab. So that's this sheet. I want to go through this really quickly just to make sure that we all are on the same page, that you all understood this completely, because it's important stuff. So the youngest rings are located where? Outside. for B? Not all the growth rings look identical. How are the ones on the outer part different? David, what did you guys say for that? How are the ones on the outside different? Okay, so they're bigger, they're wider, like they have a bigger circumference? Sure. Yep. Now, do they all look exactly the same? Let's look back at the picture. Say that again? So you can't see them as well. And I don't know if I would say, faded maybe in the picture, right? What do you notice about like the width of them? They're really, really thin, aren't they? Versus these ones that are really, really thick. And that's really important to notice, okay, as we go down. And this part here, like questions 1 and question 2, we're like, let's look at the picture and see what's going on. The one that I really care about as an earth scientist is actually question number 3. So I want to go down here to look at question number 3, just to make sure that we are really understanding this. It says, I'm going to look at part C here first. Assuming the tree was cut down in the year 2000, what year did the tree rings begin to look different? What year did you all say? When did the tree rings begin to look different? Look at your paper. You guys have this, done, right? All of you did it. Go, Hayden, what'd you say?
Year 578.
So what did you say? 578. So where did you get that number? Do you know?
It was the 550 was like, there, and then it was 28 out more.
Up this way? In. Okay, so I think I kind of understand what you're saying. So if we, from here to here was 550 years, right? That's what that meant. So I want to make sure that that's okay. So I think what you did is, I think you're on the right track, but maybe didn't quite get all of that way. Are y'all with me there that that's 550 years? So somebody, some botanist or earth scientist or whatever, had the wonderful opportunity to sit down and count all of those rings, 550 of them, okay? So we didn't make you do that. You're welcome, okay? You counted these ones, didn't you?
Yeah.
This was like 28 or something, 28 or 30 or something like that, wasn't it? 28, depending on like exactly where you counted from. Yeah, so we want to know if this right here is the year 2000, okay? And that's when it was cut down because these are the newest rings. Quick question, what year would this be? So this is the year 2000, 1999, 1998, 1997, 1996, 1995. I could keep counting 550 times, or we can use the power of subtraction. Yeah? David, would you rather use the power of subtraction? What would you say?
It's 1450.
What'd you say?
It's 1450.
1450. So this is the year 1450. Okay? Okay. So that's to here. Is this where the change happened, though? Not quite. The change happened a little bit further out, a little bit further in the future than that. How many years in the future? Was it 8? Is that right? So if this was 1450, so this would be 1451, 52, 53. Does that make sense? Yeah? So what year did the difference happen? Did the change from the nice thick rings to the really, really thin rings, what year did that happen? 1458. Okay? So if you got something around 1458, awesome. If you didn't, because maybe the question didn't make a lot of sense or you were a little confused, then fix it now. Because I want you to understand it. And I want you to see where it's coming from. Okay? Because that date matters. And we want to make sure that we've got it. So this was 1458. So does that make sense, Hayden? I think you guys were on the right track, but you didn't take it quite the way that I did. Is that okay? Awesome. Thanks for putting the answer out there to get us started. So in question 3, it says compare the date you calculated in step 2. So that was this one here. Okay. to the graph that shows the temperature change for the last 1,000 years. So we'll pull that up. What was that date? What did we just calculate? 1458. Where does 1458 start? Like here-ish? No, yeah, like there. And what do you notice? What happened around that time? It started getting cold. It started getting really cold. Over here was nice and toasty warm, right? Yeah? Down here, really cold. So, this is the part that we care about, right? Counting rings, whatever. You guys have been counting since you were in preschool. You got that. The thing that I want you to understand is the connection between the rings and the temperature. That's the big deal. That's the big money question in this case. What happened to the climate during the time the rings changed? It got cold. Absolutely. This is the science right here. From these observations, what do you hypothesize is the correlation between the thickness of the rings and climate? What do you say? Absolutely. Absolutely. The thicker the ring, equal warmer climate. Okay. So if we've got a tree that we know and we can figure out, because then we can use that to figure out the climate, right? Because again, we talked about yesterday that there aren't, little weather maps and weather forecasts that are frozen down somewhere that we can go out and look at to see what the weather looked like thousands of years ago. So the only way we can figure that out is to look at those rings. Okay? And then it says question 4 asks you to look at the diagram. Let's see. Oh yeah, this one here. So what was the question actually said, how does the duration of the little ice age, that's this one here, compare to the duration of the ice age? And by that we mean between the two interglacial periods. Yeah, like a lot shorter, right? How long did the little ice age last? 450 years, right? Like not a super long time in the grand scheme of things, okay? A long time in terms of like human life, right? But in the grand scheme of things, not all that long. Whereas, how long did this ice age last? Yeah, so this is 120,000 years before present. This goes to a little bit further than 20,000 years before present. So that's 100,000 years. That's a long time. That's a lot of cold, yeah? Okay? So that's the thing that we're going to use in the next step today that I want to make sure that you understand is that these changes in climate have been happening for a long time. Okay? What I'd like to do right now, I need you to send one person from each table. Make it somebody who hasn't gotten up lately. Come up and get a note sheet.
Oh, you don't want it?
If you guys can handle sitting together again, you're welcome to. If you'd rather not, that's fine too.
You don't have to use that, right?
You don't have to. No. If it makes you happier to just write on paper. Some people just really like to have, yeah. But I understand that. I can appreciate that. You can put that away. Mm-hmm. All right. Here we go, we're scientists. We got some notes to do. Much of this front page we've talked about, we just need to get it written down so that you've got it all in one place so that you can understand it, do it, and master it. All right? So we're talking about past climate change. Because of when the trimester fell, we actually split Unit 6 into like 6A and 6B, and we'll do 6B next trimester. But The reason when we were talking about it as a team, we actually really liked this because this is all about the history. And then when we come back to trimester 3, then we'll talk about what's happening now and beyond, okay? So just kind of a little bit of context for you. We talked about this first little header yesterday during our capture question. So we're just going to write some stuff down in here. We're talking about evidence of climate change. There are 2 different kinds of evidence that we can have when we're measuring climate. Do you remember what they were? Something and something? Direct and indirect. Yep, so we're just going to write it down. Direct evidence is data we can measure right now. Things that we can actually see and quantify based on what we see outside. It helps us to figure out what the climate is like today. Okay. And we can you give me some examples of how we can measure that? What kinds of direct data we can collect? What would be one thing we can measure? Precip? What else can we measure right now that can tell us about the climate right now? There's another big obvious one, right? Temperature. And then there are some other things that maybe we haven't really thought about in terms of data that we can use or we can measure right now. So we can measure precip and we can measure temperature. We could also look and see what kind of vegetation there is, right? The types of plants. In a region. Okay. Or we could look at the gases in the atmosphere. But there are things that we can measure right now, okay? We may have to send somebody outside to take a survey, right, or to actually do the measurement, but we can do that. That's direct measurement or finding direct evidence. Opposite of that is indirect. What's wrong?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Here we go.
We can write small. Data that is not easily accessible. Okay. That means that we have to make inferences or we have to use logic. Okay, in order to figure it out. All right. We use indirect evidence to figure out what the climate was like in the past. And by past, I don't mean last week or even 30 years ago, right? I mean like thousands of years ago, okay? We're going to focus on this indirect evidence. The direct evidence is pretty straightforward, right? Get out a thermometer, get out a rain gauge, like that stuff you can handle. The indirect is the more interesting part in terms of learning new content in earth science. So there are 3 ones that we're going to highlight here. We talked about 6 or 7 in that chart that we made last week, okay? But these are kind of 3 big ones that I want to make sure that you got, okay? Is it okay if I scroll up or not quite yet? Yeah? Okay. Just keep me posted, friends. All right, let's talk about tree rings. We spent much of the morning already talking about tree rings. One thing to note about tree rings is that they will tell us about the climate on the order of like hundreds of years. Because we have to have access to that tree, right? So that we can actually look at the rings of that tree. So we're talking hundreds of years ago. We've said it already, but the thickness of the tree rings, okay, indicates the climate. The thicker the ring means that it was a favorable conditions for growth. What do we mean by favorable conditions for growth? What do you think are going to be favorable for most trees? Warmish, right? And wet-ish, right? And not all trees need a lot of water. Not all trees need it to be really hot, right? Like a pine tree isn't going to grow in a rainforest because then it's just too darn hot and wet for that tree, right? So we have to be really aware of that kind of difference, okay? Okay. How are we doing on trees? We good? Let's talk about fossilized pollen, plants, animals. Did I go too fast? Yeah. Just that far? What's that? Are you sure?
No, keep going up.
Oh, keep going up?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Sorry. I thought you meant I was confused. Sorry.
Okay.
We good now? Thumbs up, green light, let's go. All right. Cool. I'm not trying to race through this. I just want to make sure that we get through things so that we don't have to keep going with this tomorrow. All right. Fossilized pollen, plants and animals. Okay? So the age of the sediment in which we find these fossils, whether it's pollen or plants or animals, the age of the sediment provides a timeline okay, for how old we're talking about it. So that kind of gives us the date. And as we did when we were talking about the fossilized pollen, if we've got all these different layers, yeah. I mean, if you want, you make that call. Where's the older stuff? Is it at the top or at the bottom? It's at the bottom, right? Yeah. So this is the present, and this is older. Okay. So the further down you go, the older that sediment is, and therefore the older the fossilized pollen or plants or animals or whatever it is, the older it is. Okay. So let's say that we've got a little tree that exists down there. I'm trying to draw a tree. My art is not going well today. So, do with that what you need. Kind of a tree. Maybe not. Haley doesn't really think it's a tree, but I'll look at her paper and see what her tree looks like in a minute, so it'll be okay. Okay? The species, or we could say the type of plant or animal, okay, in a given layer provides clues, okay, to the climate at that time. So for example, in this layer here, you've got this big pine tree, right? Some sort of spruce maybe. We know now that spruce trees live in cooler climates, right? Spruce is a kind of tree that one might use for a holiday decoration in December, let's say, okay? So a spruce tree grows in a cold climate. And as a result, then we know, oops, there should be an E on the end of that, sorry. Let me see if I can spell better, okay? We know that in this layer, then, it must have been cooler, okay? Even if there were, warm things here, we know that at this point in the Earth's history, it was cold on the surface. How are we doing, team? No major surprises yet, I hope. We talked a little bit about ice cores. You read about ice cores. You watched a video about ice cores. Let's just write down a couple things. Is it okay that I move down? Yeah. Yep. I know. Not everybody writes as fast as you do, though. Okay. How are we doing? All right. I will also put these up on Canvas for you in case you need to double check things or whatever as well. All right. So ice cores can tell us things about climate. Oh wait, I didn't write that one down. Hold on a second. I'll do ice cores first. Sorry. I forgot to write the one about fossils. I'm going to do that real quick first. I'm sorry. I lost track of what I was doing. How old are the oldest fossils? Do you guys remember? We read about that? Talked about that? Billions of years ago. Yeah. Fossilized pollen plants and animals can tell you things about climates from a long time ago, right? Billions of years ago. That's helpful. That's helpful to tell us things. Ice cores can tell us stuff about things thousands of years ago. That's still a long time ago. I mean, like, on the order of things, still pretty helpful. Let's talk about ice cores. So ice cores really come from snow that falls in layers, right? I mean, if you go out right now and you look at our snow, it didn't all fall in the same snowfall, right? And sometimes if you happen to walk by a place where it's been plowed out, you can actually see layers of snow from different snowfalls. If you look really carefully, you can kind of see how they've layered up. And that's exactly what happens in an ice core. The snow falls down. But unlike our winter, where I'm talking on the order of, days, maybe weeks, in this case, we're talking about years. And by years, I don't mean 5, I mean thousands, right? Because unlike here in Iowa, in theory, at some point it's going to thaw. And in theory, at some point, all that's going to melt, right? Fingers crossed. I haven't seen it yet, but maybe, okay? But where we're getting these ice cores from, it hasn't melted in a long time, right? We're talking long, long time ago. So same kind of deal that we had before. The ice core is going to be layers and layers and layers. And just like with the sediment that we talked about before, the top part is the present. And the further down you go, the older the sample is. Okay? It does look a little bit like a cat in the hat. You're right. Should we put a little brim on it? Does that make you happier? There you go. Sorry. All right. So now, here's what we need to know. Again, unlike in Iowa, in theory, it will melt at some point. Hopefully, right? The ice in ice cores does not melt ever from year to year.
there's no cat and dog in that. You would know childhood.
Oh, judgment. We don't like that. Okay.
Shh.
We got to move on, friends.
Like the little boy that was in it.
Where does this occur? Antarctica? Yep. You can also talk about near the North Pole. We can even get things, ice cores from places like Greenland. Okay. It does have to be a place where it doesn't melt from year to year, though, right? So we're not going to get an ice core in Iowa. Because believe it or not, in July, you're going to be complaining about how hot it is. It's going to happen. Now, the thing about ice cores is that it traps or collects information about climate, okay, in those layers, and it does so primarily by two things. One of them we've talked about a bunch. What is inside that ice that tells us things about the climate? Bubbles? Yeah. And the bubbles hold ancient atmosphere. Okay? So they hold air, like literally small pockets of air from the atmosphere of the time. Okay? More greenhouse gases. Mean that the climate was warmer. Now, we haven't really talked about greenhouse gases, so I kind of apologize. I do apologize for like the lack of clarity there. But when we're talking about greenhouse gases, does anybody know what some examples of those are? Absolutely, that's the big one, right? That's the one that we talked about already because we talked about the carbon cycle. The carbon dioxide is one of them, but there are a lot of other ones too, and we will talk about those right after we start trimester 3. Okay. The other thing that the ice cores can trap is dust. Okay? If there is a lot of dust, what do you think that tells scientists about the climate at the time? Why?
Probably because like all the volcano exploded and then where the atmosphere all the dust and something like that.
So that could absolutely be one reason, right? If there was a volcano, we're gonna get to that in the back too. If a volcano erupted and there was a bunch of ash, then that could be some of that dust. When can you think of in Iowa when there's a lot of dust around? What do you know about the climate then? It's dry and maybe windy. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like it's blowing all that dust kind of all around as opposed to just leaving it in one spot. So more dust means that it's a cooler climate. And we know that because it's windy. Okay. And dry. All right. Get all that stuff on that front page? Hopefully. More or less. I'll give you just a second to finish writing, then we're going to flip it over. Anybody need another minute or are we okay? All right. A couple of days ago, I asked you what caused climate change. It was when we were doing the pollen lab. It was when we were doing the pollen lab, and I asked you what caused climate change, and you all said humans. You said when they burn fossil fuels, which is true, and I'm glad you know that. But the thing that I really, really want you to understand today, okay? I need you to stay focused here with me. The thing that I really want you to understand today is that climate change is not all because of humans. Please put your phone away. You do. Don't lie to me. Okay? Climate change has been happening for millions of years. We know that because pollen changes, right? We know that because the ice cores record that. And we have not been burning fossil fuels for millions and billions of years. Okay? I want you to understand that climates have been changing for the entire length of time that the Earth has been in existence. Today we're going to talk about 3 big ones, I think. Yep, 4 big ones. 4 big natural causes of climate change. I want you to circle or highlight or put glitter pen around the word natural in your notes. And I know it's kind of hard to do it because it's in black on your thing. But I want you to make sure you pay attention to that word. These are things that cause climate change that have nothing to do with us. And I want you to know that that does happen. One major cause of natural climate change is plate tectonics. We talked about plate tectonics a long time ago, didn't we? Yeah? The plates shifting. Okay? So you remember Pangea? You remember when we were constructing Pangea? And we said that there was fossilized, what did we say? Oh my gosh. So we were talking about the coal deposits that are in the Appalachian Mountains. And we said that they come from trees that required a lot of heat and a lot of moisture, right? Like rainforest levels of things. Do you remember this? It's been a while since we said this. But if that means that West Virginia used to be in a rainforest, there must have been climate change. You with me there? Absolutely must have happened. And one of the reasons that we know this, and one of our understandings of this, has to do with the movement of the plates and the movement of the continents. Okay? As a result of those moving continents, some locations have had a change in latitude. And we know that the higher the latitude, the colder the climate in general, right? If we moved away from the equator, okay, that means that there is less direct sun and less direct sun means what about the climate?
Colder.
It's colder. Another result of plate tectonics as it relates to changing climate is a change in the ocean currents. Okay? Locations that are near the ocean, okay, have regulated temperatures. But as those currents change, then the general heat patterns or temperature patterns can change as well. And then finally, as a result of plate tectonics, we did this when we had that sand on top of the folders. We could build mountains, right? So a change in, fancy word warning, here it comes, topography. In our case, that change in topography means mountains being formed. Remember that when we form a mountain, we get the windward side where we get lots of rain. And then, what was the other one, Hannah? The leeward side. And what is true on the leeward side? It's dry, yeah. Okay. How are we doing? We're going to hit one more today and we'll do the last ones tomorrow. But I want to get this last one done. Is it okay if I go like that? This is, Jacob, were you the one that was saying volcanoes? Did you? Yeah, you brought it up. All right. So volcanic eruptions can absolutely affect climate. Seems funny. It's just this little volcano or this big volcano, right? Volcanoes can do a couple of different things. It's kind of interesting. So a volcano, when it explodes, it lets off a whole bunch of carbon dioxide. Okay? And that carbon dioxide that goes up into the atmosphere I'm going to write that down first. Eruptions release CO2. Okay? A whole bunch of extra carbon into the atmosphere means, what about the climate? Warmer climate. But it's interesting because some volcanic eruptions not only give off a whole bunch of CO2, but they also give a whole bunch of what into the air? Put a whole bunch of what into the air? Dust and ash. Yes. And that ash can cause clouds. And those clouds can cause the sunlight to not get to the ground. And so that those clouds can reflect the sun's energy and actually make it cooler. So it depends on the kind of volcanic eruption that we have, what the result is, okay? Hold on to this. I need to give you a study guide before you go, so don't put everything away so that you have space in your bag for it, okay?